everyone, this is Dre. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I play spooky games while I tell you a true crime story. This story has become more popular lately due to the new Netflix series Dahmer. This is a story about rape, murder, and cannibalism. Listener discretion is advised. Jeffrey Dahmer is credited with 17 murders throughout the 80s and early 90s. He conducted crazy experiments on his victims, such as drilling holes in their heads and pouring acid and hot water into their brains. And after they died, he would take part in necrophilia and cannibalism. His extreme acts of cruelty and his good looks have made him quite intriguing to a lot of people. He did not look like a typical serial killer. He came from a middle-class family. He was just a guy that fit the guy next door profile. Of course, this story has been told before, but there are some facts that were left out of the Netflix series. He grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was born in 1960. Both of his parents were gone a lot. Of course, his father later states that he regretted this neglect. However, Jeffrey later said in an interview that his childhood was fairly normal. When you hear of other serial killers, sometimes you hear about how awful their childhood was. He never suffered from any type of abuse, sexually or physically. His parents were not criminals. Things were not perfect in the household, but it wasn't horrible. In 1962, when Jeffrey was 2 years old, Jeffrey's father was offered a position and they moved to Ames, Iowa. Ames was only a day's drive away from Milwaukee. 1966, Jeffrey was now 6 years old. His dad, Lionel, earned his PhD and landed a full-time position. They then moved to Doyle, Ohio. This meant less money trouble for the family. Jeffrey's parents then gave birth to his brother David. However, his parents were having marriage problems. They lived in separate rooms in their house. Joyce, his mom, had a hard time bonding with her son, and later it was thought she had postpartum depression. Jeffrey had an abnormal obsession with dead animals. When Jeffrey was only 2 years old, he and his dad found a dying bird and they nursed it back to life. He originally wasn't interested in the killing of animals, but more the science behind the anatomy. He would bring roadkill home to dissect. Lionel was happy that his son seemed interested in biology and science. This was a new way for them to bond. Jeffrey's father showed him how to bleach the animal's bones. However, Jeffrey later used this technique on human bones. When Jeffrey was 7, as shown in the Netflix series, Jeffrey did give his teacher tadpoles. She gave them away to another student. This student happened to be his best friend. He did kill the tadpoles with motor oil, and this demonstrated his lack of empathy towards animals. Having fun with different animals is a common trait among serial killers who get their first taste of killing by abusing or killing animals. This is called the McDonald triad. It's commonly used in criminal profilers. Bedwetting and arson are the other two parts of the triad. However, Dahmer was never found to kill any other animals besides the tadpoles. Dahmer attended high school. He was a loner. He didn't have very many friends. He felt he had a normal social life. His teachers did see him as a polite kid. He was in band and in tennis. However, his main interests were dissecting animals and drinking. He loved to find out how things worked. His father was proud of this. But his father did not realize that Jeffrey had disturbing intentions. In ninth grade biology, he took the remains home from a fetal pig. He started branching out to dogs and cats. He hid this from his parents and teachers. In the Netflix series, they showed his teacher allowed him to take an extra pig, but this was not the case. He wanted to see what the insides of animals look like. He was sexually stimulated when seeing the insides of animals. This later switched to human insides. He drank quite heavily. He became an alcoholic by the age of 14. He did report to school, however, he normally had liquor and beer on him. The legal drinking age was only 18 in the 70s, so it was much easier for him to access. His habits were well known to his friends, but Jeffrey called it his medicine. He used it to suppress his homicidal urges. When he was going through puberty, he started to realize that he was a homosexual. He did not let his parents know for the fear of being shunned. It was on the don't ask, don't tell. At the age of 14, he remembered having thoughts and fantasies of pain mixed with pleasure. By the age of 16, he knew he wanted to act on these obsessions. He planned to kidnap a male jogger. He attempted a few times and couldn't get up the nerve to do it. He still lived at home with his parents, so he had that to consider. He was a loner, but he wasn't bullied. He would pull pranks. He was known as the class clown. Other students would do pranks and call it doing a Dahmer. However, one of the most severe pranks was on a senior trip, he made a prank call to the Vice President of the United States. He did smaller pranks such as a photobomb in the Honor Society photo. He also drew chalk outlines of bodies throughout the high school hallways. He graduated from high school in 1978. His parents divorced. His mom took Jeffrey's 12-year-old brother David to northern Wisconsin and left. Jeffrey's dad Lionel also left the home. Both parents left him in the house alone for the summer of 1978. He drank most of the time while daydreaming of murder and rape. On June 18, 1978, this was when he got a taste of blood. He woke up, drank, went to the liquor store to get more liquor, and he saw a male hitchhiker and pulled over. He offered to give him a ride. This 18-year-old hitchhiker agreed to go to Dahmer's house and drink more beer before Dahmer gave him a ride. Dahmer later said that it was a fantasy come true. Once they got to the Dahmer's house, Jeffrey planned to act. He felt all the pieces of his fantasy just fell into place. Now, mind you, Dahmer was about 6 feet tall. He lifted weights daily. He was quite strong. The hitchhiker made a fatal mistake. When he turned his back to leave, this is when Dahmer hit him in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. He then realized there were not any witnesses to his crime, and he felt this was just the perfect crime. He satisfied his homicidal urge. Dahmer then cleaned up the scene. He was different than most serial killers. Cleaning up was also part of the enjoyment. He dragged the body to the bathtub, dissected the body like a fetal pig. It took hours since he was stimulated. He buried the dissected remains under the house because he knew his dad would be stopping by soon. Later in the summer, he got the remains out and then dissolved them in acid and flushed what was left down the toilet. He continued to use the acid to dissolve bones of his victims. The ones that would not dissolve fully, he would smash them with a sledgehammer. Then he would scatter the remains in the woods behind his house. Lionel, Jeffrey's dad, moved back into the home after the divorce. Unbeknownst to him, the crime that took place in his home. Jeffrey had left empty beer cans and liquor bottles throughout the house. Lionel was frustrated with Jeffrey. He saw him as a lazy drunk. Lionel convinced Jeffrey to enroll in college. Jeffrey moved into the dorms, and he chose his major as business, but this was far from his interests. Lionel went to visit Jeffrey at the dorms and saw him drunk in his room. He then realized his son was not meant for college. He paid a year in advance for his college. But, oh well, he made Jeffrey join the military. He joined the army, went to basic training. He was then funneled into the combat medic. He got good reports from his commanders. Dahmer did try to fit in with others. He didn't have any conflicts with any other soldiers. And when he was transferred to Germany, he began drinking heavily again. There were 5 unsolved murders around Baumholder, where Dahmer was stationed. Some experts think this is too much of a coincidence. There were also men who accused Dahmer of rape, but many reports were ignored or discarded by the commanding officers. Male-on-male rape was just unheard of. The close living quarters in the military were not ideal. Dahmer may have committed a series of rapes in the army. One of the soldiers moved in to bunk with Dahmer, and he stated he was repeatedly raped by Dahmer. He stated in that era no one would have believed him, and it would have been shame on his family if he said he was raped. Another man claimed Dahmer raped him. When they were training, he believes that he was drugged and raped by Dahmer. Again, this incident was too ignored. He began drinking as heavily as before. Job performance declined, and he was then discharged in March of 1981 for violating the military policies concerning drug and alcohol abuse. He was honorably discharged. After his discharge, he was given a one-way ticket to anywhere. He chose to go to Miami. When he arrived, he got a job at a deli. He felt the sun and ocean were going to have a positive impact on him. He was only at his job for a couple of months before he was fired for being a drunk at work. Dahmer was evicted from his room where he was staying in the late summer of 1981 since he ran out of money from the army. He finally called his dad. His dad helped Jeffrey financially and accepted him back home, with rules of course. Back in Ohio, Lionel remarried. Jeffrey's dad told him his excessive drinking would not be accepted and he needed to get a job. He was also required to help around the house. Jeffrey was later arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct. Jeffrey was then forced to move in with his grandma. His dad felt him living with his grandma would help him. The arrangement seemed good at first, but he continued his heavy drinking. Shortly after he moved in with his grandma, he bought a revolver. He told his dad it was for target practice and protection. His dad eventually took the gun away. His dad started to see his dependence on drinking mixed with a gun was not a good idea. He helped his grandma around the house and went with her to church. He finally found a job as a phlebotomist. He got fired after only 10 months. He was out of work again. But working around blood all the time, he took a vial of blood home and it left him craving more. Those of you that saw the Netflix series, there's a scene that shows him drinking blood. Yuck. He stayed unemployed for 2 years. He then got a job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. He was working there when he was arrested in 1991. He tried to suppress his urges. The gun and the blood only made his urges stronger. August 7, 1982, Dahmer was arrested for his first sex crime. He went to the State Fair Festival just down the street from his grandma's house. He had the day off from the plasma center, went to the liquor store. After he was heavily intoxicated, he walked to the fairgrounds. He was not there to hang out with friends and go on rides. He needed his release. He exposed himself to a group of women and children. He had charges reduced to simply drunk and disorderly conduct. The justice system did not hold him accountable. He found out that a Milwaukee had a large gay nightlife scene. He indulged in this nightlife. He felt this was finally a solution to his needs. He would go to bars and bath clubs. However, this was not enough. He needed to have complete control. He started to drug his partners. He loved being able to fully dominate them. He would use sleeping pills on men at the bathhouses. His membership was eventually revoked after a few men reported him to the management. Word quickly spread about him as the guy who slipped Mickeys to others. He was then not welcomed at all the bathhouses in the city. He now needed to find a new outlet to his desires. He saw a male mannequin in a store window. He liked the mannequin so much not only because it was attractive, but also he liked that the mannequin was still. It already seemed submissive. He broke the window to the store and took the mannequin back to his grandma's house. He enjoyed this feeling of stealing. It was more fuel to his fire, having the fear of getting caught. He enjoyed being able to get away with this too. He used this immobile mannequin. His grandma forced him to throw it away once she found it. She knew there was something off if there was a 24-year-old man keeping a mannequin in his room. He didn't want his dad to find out about it, so he went along with grandma's wishes and threw it away. Dahmer later says in an interview that he trained himself to view people as objects instead of people. Without his mannequin, he now needed a new way to satisfy himself. He was reading the obituaries one morning and he thought he could excavate a recently deceased man and have his way with the body and not have to commit murder himself. He felt this was a perfect plan. He found an 18-year-old was recently deceased and buried in a cemetery near his grandma's house. He would wait until nighttime and got to work digging. He didn't realize how hard it was to dig so deep. Even for someone as athletic as himself, he got frustrated and just went back home to grandma's. He thought maybe he could break into a morgue. He was trying to figure out different ways. Dahmer continued to attempt to placate his desires. On September 6, 1986, Dahmer drank all day and went to the KK River. He searched for a new victim along the river. He exposed himself to 2 boys near the river. Police were called and charged him with lewd behavior, which is considered a sex crime, but of course, the charges were lowered and dropped, and he was given another slap on the wrist and was charged with only disorderly conduct. He had to pay a small fine and was put on probation for only a year. He didn't even have a probation officer ever visit his home. He lied to his family about the arrest and told them that he was only urinating near the river and the boys were mistaken. He claimed it was all a mistake. He always knew what to say. He continued to go to church with Grandma and play the part of a good grandson. But at night, Dahmer would keep going to gay bars. On September 15, 1987, he met a man at Club 219. He invited him to the Ambassador Hotel downtown. This hotel is a pricey one. Along with Dahmer's charm, the man went without hesitation. Unfortunately, he did not leave alive. Dahmer passed out from all the alcohol, and when he woke up, he found the man was next to him, lifeless. Dahmer claims he didn't plan to murder him, but this man's chest was crushed. Of course, Dahmer panicked. He came up with a plan. He put a do not disturb sign on the door and went out to buy a suitcase. He stuffed the man's body into the suitcase. He didn't have a car, so he called for a cab. The cab driver even helped load the heavy suitcase into the cab. Can you believe that? Imagine being that cab driver and later finding out there was a dead body inside. Crazy. The driver took him to his grandma's house. Dahmer had to dispose of the body. Grandma was asleep when he arrived, so he took the body to the basement. He had his way with the body. But he knew he had to get to work and started to dissect the body. He threw away the flesh and began to smash the bones. He cleaned up the basement as if nothing happened, except he kept the head and the genitals as trophies. He bleached it to help preserve it. He kept them in a box in his bedroom closet. His dad was worried about Jeff and decided to search Jeff's room at Gradwin's house. Lionel discovered the box, but it was locked. He thought it was only magazines and such. He approached Jeffrey, and Jeffrey thought he was caught. However, he took the box back up to his room, removed his trophies, and replaced them with dirty magazines. He was still concerned that his family would find out that he was gay, so these magazines were all heterosexual. He continued to be so deceptive. Lionel said when Jeff showed him the magazines in the box, he simply told him to get rid of them. Lionel had no idea what was in the box just moments before. He realized that most people gave him the benefit of the doubt. After this killing, Dahmer said he no longer wanted to control his urges. He knew it was easy to get away with now. In 1988, Dahmer had continued to lure gay men from bars back home with him and ended up murdering them. Grandma's basement became his own mini slaughterhouse. He returned to Club 219 and met a 14-year-old boy who was prostituting himself. He offered to pay the boy to take photos of him. He agreed and went with Dahmer to his house. Dahmer put sleeping pills into the boy's drink. He passed out, and then Dahmer strangled him. He took the body to the basement for dismemberment. About a month later, he took another victim from the same bar and did the same. In 1988, he was saved by luck again. He met a different man at another gay bar, spiked his drink, but before he could do anything, his grandma yelled to him that it was too late to have visitors. He didn't want to get caught. He knew his grandma was awake, so he thought it was best to let the man go. He felt that was his best move. The sleeping pills were so strong, though, this man was not in good shape. He got a cab and dropped the man off at the hospital. The man then reported the incident to police, not knowing he was in the grasp of a serial killer. He just reported being drugged and robbed, but because he was so drugged up, he didn't remember Dahmer's address and other important details, so the police didn't think it was anything more than a small domestic fight. His grandma complained about a foul smell coming from the basement. She also disliked all men that Jeffrey was bringing into her home at all hours of the night, and all of his drinking. His grandma would find beer cans in his room and in the basement. She kept telling him that he would need to find a new place to live if this continued. He pleaded with her and said he would slow his drinking. Him and his grandma later agreed that he would move out. He found an apartment in Milwaukee within walking distance of his job at the chocolate factory. He didn't care that the apartment wasn't great. He met a 13-year-old boy and invited him over to take photos. He laced the boy's drink with sleeping pills. The boy immediately felt sick and left quickly. He was then taken to the hospital and they pumped his stomach. Since the boy was from the same neighborhood, he was able to lead police straight to his door. They arrested him at work and the following day at his work at the chocolate factory. He pleaded not guilty, but they found crushed up sleeping pills in his apartment. He received a plea bargain and was convicted of felony sexual assault. He was required to spend a year in county jail. He now had to register as a sex offender. In 1989, right before he had to turn himself into jail, he moved back into Grandma's house. He then met a new guy at a gay bar. He offered money to take photos. They drank, he drugged, he murdered him, did his usual routine of dismemberment. He kept his head and genitals. The head of his first victim crumbled, and Jeffrey wanted a replacement trophy. He knew he couldn't keep them at Grandma's, but he was on work release. He had to sleep in jail and was allowed to leave to go to work every day. He kept his new trophies in his locker at work. Gosh, this is so crazy. All this time, people worked with him and maybe shared a locker next to his and never knew what he kept inside. While he was in jail, he wasn't able to commit more murders. Dahmer continued to lift weights and stay in shape. He had exceptional conduct while in jail. He kept to himself. He later wrote a letter to a judge requesting early release. Since he had shown good behavior, he once again used deception to his advantage. He only served 10 months. He was released from jail. He had money saved and was able to rent a new apartment at the Oxford Apartments. He was the minority in the neighborhood. He lived in a high-crime neighborhood, which included lots of drug use. Since he was white, no one ever suspected him of any crime, and he was polite to his neighbors. On May 14th, he drank and met a 32-year-old male prostitute, eventually killing him. He also finally brought home his trophies from his work locker. About a week later, he brought another man back and accidentally drank the man's spiked drink, and when he woke up, the man was gone along with some of his belongings. After this, he was much more careful on which drink he drank from. Dahmer set up a security system for his apartment. He had a video camera, locks on the doors, even some sirens. He set this up to make it more difficult so people could not leave, and also so people could not get in and find his trophies. Dahmer claims he later branched out to cannibalism. He wanted to feel his victims were a part of him. He got gratification and satisfaction to feel that. He later tried to create what he would call a zombie. He wanted to keep the person alive but immobile. He would inject acid or hot water into their brain. Some lived for a few hours, but all of them eventually died. He performed experiments on his victims. He said the killings were just a means to an end. He claimed 4 more victims from May to September. In early September, he met a 22-year-old man. When he enticed him back to have drinks, he realized he didn't have enough pills to fully drug him. So he stabbed him and killed him within minutes. He felt really proud of himself that he was able to do this with his own hands. But he started to get sloppy. He went to the Grand Avenue Mall, and after talking to a 24-year-old man who was not homosexual, but when Dahmer mentioned money for photos, he went along. He needed money as he was a new father. Jeffrey was not attracted to this man. He thought about letting him go, but did not want to get caught, so he went along with his ritual. He felt like this was such a waste, in the sense that he didn't get satisfaction from this victim. He continued to search for new victims. He loved watching The Exorcist 3. He said he got pleasure from watching that movie. He began to prowl the streets for younger victims. In 1991, he met a 19-year-old man and offered to pay him for Polaroids. He was drugged and murdered. Later, he met another 19-year-old man. Dahmer drugged him, drilled a hole in his head, and poured acid into the hole. He then passed out, strangled him, and eventually dismembered the body. He kept his head. In May of 1991, he saw a man who was deaf and mute at a bar, passed him a note to lure him back, and he added his skull to the collection. In May 26 of 1991, got the urge to find a new victim. He met a 14-year-old Laotian boy who was the brother of the boy that he was arrested for in the past. The boy did not recognize Dahmer. Dahmer spiked the boy's drink and then locked up the apartment and went to the bar to have some more drinks. When he returned, the boy was outside with 2 neighbors. He was naked and incoherent. Dahmer lied and said he was his boyfriend. The ladies waited for police to show up, but of course he convinced the police that it was just two gay men who had an argument. He attempted to turn this boy into a zombie. He died quickly, adding this skull to his collection too. Can you imagine these police not checking his apartment thoroughly? In the Netflix series, you can see that they walk in and they don't even catch a body that's laying on the floor. This is how in and out they were. And this boy was only 14 years old. The apartment's manager from the apartment complex finally approached Dahmer after several neighbors' complaints of a foul smell coming from Dahmer's apartment. He did have several body parts he was keeping in there. His first excuse was he had refrigerator issues. The next time he was approached, his excuse was that some of his tropical fish had died. He made an attempt to clean up a bit. He brought a 57-gallon drum of hydrochloric acid to dispose of the body parts that he did not want. In June of 1991, he started going to Chicago via a bus to find his new victims. On June 30th, he went to attend a gay pride parade. After trying to convince several men to go home with him, he eventually met a 20-year-old at the bus station. After some time, he convinced him to return back to his apartment, adding one more to the collection. Jeffrey went back to Chicago again on July 5th, met another man. He eventually went back home with him. Of course, he put his potion in his drink, tried again to make him a zombie. He wanted to keep him alive a little longer. He didn't use acid this time, he used boiling water, but later dismembered him and kept his head in the freezer. At this point, he was running out of room in his refrigerator and freezer. Only 10 days later, on July 15th, he met his latest victim. He was an inspiring bodybuilder. Dahmer was so attracted to his muscles. He eventually killed him and kept several of his body parts due to his fascination. After several warnings, he was terminated from his job at the chocolate factory on July 19th. This meant more time to focus on his true passion, killing. He met a 25-year-old man who was a father of 3, who was stuck in Milwaukee. Dahmer approached him, listened to his story, invited him back to the apartment for drinks. Since this man was out of money, this man agreed for money for photos. He was eventually murdered, but Dahmer left his body for a couple of days, and when Dahmer went to dismember his body, the head was covered in maggots. Ugh. Dahmer still kept the head in the freezer along with the others, and the rest of the body in the drum of acid. July 24th, 1991, Dahmer met a 31-year-old man at a pizza parlor. He was a straight man, but was down on his luck, so he was also interested in making money. Dahmer convinced him to go with him to his apartment. Almost immediately, Dahmer wanted him to disrobe. Of course, he gave this man his potion and a mixed drink. The man started to notice boxes of acid and a strong foul odor in the apartment. Dahmer handcuffed one of the man's wrists. Dahmer then showed him a knife. He started listening to his heart and said he wanted to hear it because he was going to eat it. This man was able to escape and flagged down a police car. The police went to Dahmer's apartment. He opened the door, but they needed a warrant to search further. The man dashed in to show them the knife. An officer went in behind him and found a stash of Polaroids of corpses. When the police raided his apartment, they found several photos of his victims in various states. This would help him relive these moments of murders and dismemberments. This is when he was eventually arrested in 1991. Police called for backup and were horrified with all of their findings, including human body parts in the refrigerator. They wheeled out the 57-gallon drum, which contained 3 dismembered torsos. He was then taken to police headquarters. He was facing life in prison. Dahmer was almost excited to tell the full stories to police. He said he wanted to confess everything and admitted to killing 16 in Milwaukee and 1 in Ohio. The detectives were horrified by these details. He kept saying he wanted to set up an altar as a memorial with all the skulls. After Jeffrey was arrested, his dad Lionel admitted to having neglected Jeffrey in his early years. His parents were not often around. Dahmer was given 15 consecutive life sentences, or 957 years in prison. Plus, Dahmer was sentenced to another life term, adding it to the others. Dahmer was immediately threatened by other inmates. The prison took these threats seriously. They separated him from general population for his first year. He was in solitary confinement. 2 years into his sentence, Dahmer was confronted by another inmate. He first asked Dahmer if he committed those crimes. Then he picked up a 20-pound dumbbell and repeatedly struck Dahmer in the head and face. Dahmer collapsed and the man continued to beat Dahmer and another inmate. Dahmer died later that day. There are several books and movies about Jeffrey Dahmer. If you want to check out the latest series on Netflix, it is a little gruesome, so beware. And please be aware of your surroundings and situations, and don't go home with random strangers. Again, this is Dre. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time.